right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Caris Circle. Caris Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Caris Books, and Caris Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are always so delighted to be here at the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history. The AARL is one of our greatest partners, and every event we do here is special and thoughtful, and we're really grateful to the staff and volunteers who make it happen. Tonight's event is also co-sponsored by the Counter Narrative Project. The Counter Narrative Project seeks to shift narratives about Black, gay, and queer men and to change policy and improve lives. CNP stands in the tradition of Marlon Riggs, Essex Hemphill, Joseph Beam, James Baldwin, and Bayard Rustin. So if you don't know about CNP, check out their website, Counter Narrative Project. We wanted to celebrate this book in April of 2020. And we were all geared up to celebrate George and their amazing writing. We saw this book first featured at some of the early bookseller conferences, and we knew when we saw this beautiful cover, when we heard just the first little tiny rumblings, that this book was going to be an important book. And it's rare that you get that feeling in the bookselling world. It doesn't always happen. But when we heard about this book, we were like, this is a book that the world needs. And so, almost 4 years later, we have the honor of getting to celebrate this book. And we're delighted to get to celebrate this book with an Atlanta artist who means a lot to us, Kimberly Latrice Jones. Kimberly is an American author and filmmaker known for the New York Times bestselling young adult novel, I'm Not Dying With You Tonight. The book was nominated for Outstanding Literary Work, Youth Teen at the 2020 NAACP Image Awards. But we know Kimberly is a bookseller. In fact, we were reminiscing about how we used to hang out at bookselling conferences as part of our Georgia gang. So it's really special when someone who knows the bookselling world, knows the fights about censorship and all the things that George has been through, and is a friend to the author, can be here with us. So we're really glad that we get to welcome George and Johnson tonight. George, who uses they, them pronouns, is an Emmy-nominated, award-winning, and best-selling Black non-binary author and activist. They have written on race, gender, sex, and culture for Essence, The Advocate, BuzzFeed News, Teen Vogue, and more than 40 other national publications. George has appeared on BuzzFeed's AM to DM as well as MSNBC. They are a proud HBCU alum twice over and a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, Incorporated. Their debut memoir, All Boys Aren't Blue, which we are celebrating tonight, was a New York Times bestseller and garnered many accolades. It was the second most banned book of 2022 in the United States, according to the American Library Association, which is a dubious honor, but we think they don't ban you unless you're doing something right. For their work fighting book bans and challenges, the National Coalition Against Censorship honored George with its Free Speech Defender Award, and Time magazine named them one of the 100 most influential people in the world. While writing their memoir, George used he, him pronouns. Originally from Plainfield, New Jersey, they now live in Los Angeles, California. So please give a warm Atlanta welcome to George M. Johnson and Kimberly Latrice Jones. Woo!
Like it's their event, so they get to pick the seat. I'm so excited tonight to be here with George. George is one of my most favorite people in all of America, and that's including y'all. No shade, but I'm still better than everybody. So I'm super excited to be here with a legend, an icon, someone who has fought the fight for our fellow authors. Whenever I think about them trying to silence us, for them trying to decide what our stories are, I think of George. And I think of you because not only have you been the face of that, but you have been the fight in that. And that's not always a fair battle, but boy, is it iconic.
Thank you.
Definitely a legend and an icon. So we're gonna go ahead and get started, and there will be a section, so you guys go ahead and stuff your questions in your bras and get prepared, because there will be a moment when you need to pull them on out like your grandma's $20 bill and come to the mic and ask them, okay? So the first thing I want to ask you is this beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous cover. We got to start with that. What inspired you to choose the title All Boys Aren't Blue, and what does it personally mean to you?
So the original title of the book was not All Boys Aren't Blue, which is interesting. The original title of the book was Smile, Black Boy Smile, when I submitted it. And then when my editor came back, and Macmillan came back, like, you got the deal, however, we want a title that leans a little bit more into what we're reading in the pages. Mm-hmm. So they allowed me the opportunity to make the decision on what the new title would be. And so I gave them like 4 different titles, but All Boys Aren't Blue was like the first one that I came up with. And they were like, we really like this, like, tell us more about it. And so I just explained to them, like, I grew up with a dad who was a police officer, so I grew up in like what's considered like a blue family. The character of Blue from Queen Sugar at the time was also like really, really pivotal for television, even though like a lot of people were watching Queen Sugar, but a lot of people were not watching Queen Sugar. Mm-hmm. But that character of Blue who played with the doll, and then like everybody was fine with that character playing with the doll until they weren't fine with that character playing with the doll as a little boy. And then like paying homage to Moonlight and the blue in Moonlight. So it was just like, I wanted like to, and like Terrell Alvin McCraney was just someone who I looked up to, but also someone who gave me a lot of advice before I wrote the book. That's the person who wrote Moonlight. And so all of those things just kind of went into the title for me. And when it came to the cover, I was just very adamant about it. And I remember I was like, well, I think the cover should look like this. And like, at first, Macmillan, they were like, well, authors typically don't choose the cover. Like, they don't usually have a lot of opinions on it. And I was like, okay, but this cover needs to look like very queer. Yeah. Like, because I don't want to hide it. Yeah. Like, hide my story behind some, like, something else, like just words. Like, I was like, I don't want to do that. I want it to be really, really at the forefront. And so I had a lot of say in the book cover, which is my face. And then the flowers, I chose which flowers it would be, which is the poinsettia, the yellow rose, which is my fraternity flower, the bird of paradise in the middle is my mom's favorite flower, and the poinsettia at the front is, I got them backwards. No, the poinsettia in the middle is Nanny's favorite flower, which is why she's so pivotal to the book. And then the bird of paradise is in the front, which is my mom's favorite flower. So I chose everything with a lot of intention, and and so now it is what it is.
Now you say you grew up in a blue house.
Yes.
What was that experience like, and how did that shape the George M. Johnson we know today?
Yeah, it was interesting. Like, I grew up with a dad who was a cop, who ended up being a lieutenant at like his top rank, also was acting chief for a time. But was also still very much in tune with racism and what was going on at the police department and many things, right? So like, although he was a cop and understood what his role looked like in society, he also had to sue the police department for some of the racist things that they were doing internally.
Wow.
And my mom also worked at the police department. She was one of the head secretaries, and she sued the police department for some of the things that they were doing that were also racist, right? So it's like, they understood how they played a part in that system while also understanding that as Black folks, they couldn't just be quiet about the part that they played in that system. So it was interesting for me to grow up in that type of household, because I've become, anybody who knows me now is like, F the police. But it's like, I grew up in that household. So we have interesting conversations at times. At Thanksgiving and for Christmas. When those type of things come up. But at the end of the day, they respect the fact that I have my own mind and I'm on my own journey, and what I do for community is what I do for community. And I will say, like, I didn't grow up with like a dad or mom, like people who were like so pro-police that like they couldn't understand like the racism and the things that were inherently built into that system. Mm-hmm. Like my dad, even now, would talk about like, no, it's effed up that they do this, it's effed up that they do that, it's effed up that this still goes on, right? Like, cause he was a part of that. So it's like, I didn't grow up with somebody who just was like, no, like we could fix it from the inside. He was never that type of person. So I grew up with somebody who also had an independent mind, even though he was caught up in a system that was built to help him hurt his own. But he understood that, and even like now, like he hasn't been a cop in 15 years now. So it's like, it's been a long time. But I got to grow up in a household where, because I watched him have such a strong opinion and be able to have his own thoughts, he allowed me the space to have my own thoughts and opinions on that particular system. So it's like I grew up in that household. I understood the privilege that I had because I still have a card in my wallet that says like George M. Johnson is the son of a police officer, because that's what they give you, and people don't know that, but they give you a metal card that when you are the child of a cop, and you can show it anytime you get pulled over, and it changes the entire interaction that you have with police officers.
Wow.
But people don't know that, right? It says like, my dad is a PBA paying member and was a lieutenant, and I am the child of so-and-so. And then they will call the police department to verify it. And a lot of times they will let you go on your own, right?
See, I thought I was fancy because I still use my mom's Sears and Roebuck retirement.
And so like a lot of people, I know this mic is playing. And so like a lot of people don't know like there are like these systems that are still at play, even with that when you're the child of a police officer. And so it's like, so that's what I grew up with. And so it is an interesting juxtaposition to be in, because it's like, it's still F them, but also like there are privileges that come with when you are the child. Whether you, like if you're a black child of a cop, there is a system that you get taught. But my dad also was the president of the Black Police Officers. So like it was called Ebony, and it was within the police department. It was called Ebony, and that was the Black Police Officers. The Black Police Officers used to come to our house once a week for their meetings. And so all the black cops in town, we knew every single black cop in town because they all were fighting against racism within the police department. So it was a very interesting juxtaposition to grow up in, knowing what Ebony was, but it literally was a whole group built at the police department called Ebony that was all the black police officers, and my dad was the president of one.
Wow.
So yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that makes sense as to why just having that lived experience, which is why honesty is so your bag, your label, your who you are. And the chapter, Honest Abe Lied to Me. It delves into your mother, how your mother instilled a strong sense of black pride in you. And can you discuss the misconception that black queer people choose their sexual orientation or gender identity before their blackness, and how you address that in your book?
Yeah, there's a huge misconception, right? It's like, people will ask us like, when you walk in this room, like, you gotta be black first, and it's like, okay, but if I'm in a room full of black people, which was primarily what my life was, I get picked apart for my queerness first. So like, there's no need for me to have to make a decision on like, if I walk in this room black first or queer first, because many of us grow up just around black folk. So when I walk in there and it's all black folk, y'all ain't worried about that I'm black, because it's like, okay, everybody, we already assuming everybody in here gonna be black. We start picking you apart because, oh, you a black woman, so I feel superior to you, and you a black queer, so I feel superior to you, and this. So my whole intention was like, I never walk in a room just as one piece of myself. I always walk in a room as fully a black queer person, or a queer black person, or however you want to title it or call it. Like, I'm always going to come fully myself, because I refuse to separate myself into pieces for the appeasement of somebody's momentary thoughts. Because that's really what it is, right? Like, it's what you feel in the moment you think should dictate my entire life. And I already have to face the fact that like, I have to already be under attack from my state, which is, when I say my state, that is the United States of America. Like, I'm already under attack from my government. I am not also going to then choose to be under attack from my own community and from the communities that I exist in within blackness. And so that's what I try to get into.
And then it's tiered in queerness too, right? So
there's
femphobia, there's fatphobia, there's
tiered,
all
there's
these
colorism, it's texturism, like all of the isms and the phobias still play a role even within our queer community, right? And so it's like, and transphobia, right? Which is the largest one, right? And so it's like, I have just made the decision to refuse anybody who thinks that I'm gonna show up as pieces of myself. Like, I refuse to show up as well, I'm George, and I'm gonna only show you this piece today and this piece today. Like, I am a fully black, non-binary, queer person. I'm gonna show up in every room as that, and I want everybody to show up as their full selves, because it's absolute BS. Because at the end of the day, it's just like the game of assimilation, right? And so it's like, we have taken what white folk have done to us, which is, well, you gotta dress better. So then we started dressing better. Well, you gotta speak differently. So we started speaking differently. Then it's like, well, we don't like y'all with locks or braids, so cut your hair. And you cut your hair. You could do every single thing that they ask you, but that final question is gonna be, well, can you just be white? And that's the thing that we can't do. We can do every single piece of the assimilation thing, but the one thing we can't do is be white. And then we got black straight people that do the same thing to black queer people. Well, could you talk better? Could you be more masculine? Could you be more this? Could you look more fit? Could you do? We could do every single thing, and then at the end of the day, they're gonna be like, well, could you just not be queer?
Don't you like her?
Right, and that's the thing that I'm not gonna do. So at the end of the day, we could keep playing that game, but we know it ultimately gets to a place where these people will never accept you anyway, so you should be who you are regardless.
And who you are is so delicious and nutritious, good for you and good to you. So why would you adjust it for anyone else's comfort? You know what I mean?
Right.
That's a ridiculous assumption. It's like, that's like saying, stop being a delicious piece of French bread with all the fixings and some of the finest cheeses and some berries with a little something on the side, and just give me some wheat toast. God's green earth when I do that. When writing about losing your virginity in All Boys Are Blue, what was your approach in sharing such a personal experience, especially one you had previously shared with very few people? Because all of our first time is so awkwardly embarrassing, and just like nobody in the room knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
So that had to be extremely vulnerable to write about that.
Yeah, the hardest part to write about, when I wrote about losing my virginity, the hardest part to write about was the fact that I come from a community that hates verse people.
See,
the isms. So in writing about that chapter, people found out that I was verse. And that was probably the hardest part about having to spill my tea, was because it was like, oh, well, we just assumed you were this or this. You were top or bottom, right? So it's like, that actually was one of the struggles. Was like, damn, I'm gonna really spill this and everybody gonna know my tea. But then it was like, all right, the real goal of this chapter is to let teens know that there is a period of exploration where nobody knows what they're doing. And we're all just trying to figure it out, what works best for us. We're just bumbling around, and then we're just pulling from the images that we have, which primarily come from, which, you know, the Moms for Liberty love to get the soundbite of me saying, pornography, because that is where most of our education comes from, because they don't teach us the shit in schools. So it's like, if you're not going to teach it to us in schools, you're not going to allow us to read books about the stuff, there is only one other access point for most teen readers to get it from, and it's from Google, and it is typically pornography. And that's actually the problem, is that we're trying to steer them away from that, to steer teens into, this is what it actually looks like. It doesn't look like this romanticized thing that they have put on video and have recorded for 6 hours, and it doesn't look like this storyline plotted out thing where you came to fix the pipes under the sink and all of a sudden you fix this up. Like, that's not what this really looks like. And so in writing that chapter, I wrote what it really looked and felt like. And that was my ultimate goal, was to give them, like, it's okay to be scared of that moment. I was scared too. It's okay to be fearful in that moment, because I was fearful too. And it's also okay to not know what position you're supposed to be in that moment, because I didn't know what position I was supposed to be in that moment. It manufactured itself the way that it did that first time, which was different the second time. So like, it was like really just telling the truth about like the exploration of who I was as a queer person, and who we all are as beings who at some point have to enter into that space of our sexuality. And so,
And it's also like a great normalization tool, right? Because you know, if there are, you know, because there are these phobias that exist within the queer community about femphobia, about being, you know, verse and things like that, it's like, I'm a firm believer in, I've given up on adults, to hell with them, damn them to hell. But where we have like the most flexibility and change in the world is with the kids, right? I'm about to misquote him to death, but Frederick Douglass said something to the extent that he would rather raise strong children than deal with broken men, you know? And so it's just like, I'm Gen X. We fucked up everything. You know what I mean? We just get shit right. That's why we hide in the bush now. Like, don't even look at me, okay? I know I suck, okay? I'm aware of myself. But it's like to have this fresh new generation in Gen Z and even Gen Alpha coming up now, putting some normalization like that on the page is so key and critical. And, you know, for me, I always write hood girl stories, but I do that because I want to normalize the etymology of hood girls because they are the architects of cool and we steal from them. And at the time in which they're inventing it, we tell them that they're less than, that they're trash, that they're ghetto. And then we steal it, monetize it, and continue to marginalize them as they have had. Young black women and trans women have had the most impact on etymology of English language than anybody.
Absolutely.
Even if you walked up on this stage today and said, put your hand together, that comes from black queer jazz language of the 1920s. When you think about the phrasing of that sentence, it doesn't sound like structured English, because it's not. So it's so embedded in the language now that we don't even realize how much our trans sisters and how much our black ghetto queens have given us and delivered to us. And so it's the normalization of it that we have as YA authors, the ability to do. And it's not just that I want, you know, it's not that I just want hood girls in Milwaukee to see themselves in the page, just like I'm sure it's not that you just want queer boys in New York to see themselves. I want Sally in Ohio that's never gonna have a lived experience with these people to see them in their authentic selves and nurture some empathy in her so that she doesn't join Moms of Liberty when she turns 25.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Sure. Yes.
So that's the important part.
Yeah.
So I think it's dope that you put a verse boy on the page. Let him live and breathe. If you could have any superpower, what would it be and why?
That's a good question. I never got that. If I could have any superpower, I don't know. I love Storm from the X-Men. She's just my favorite. I guess it would be weather manipulation.
It's the wardrobe.
It is. She was always so fab. Like she was always, the hair was fab, the outfits was fab, and her monologues were so Butch Queen. Or like her monologue, like she always gave a monologue before she did what she was about to do. And Vogue would just be like, "Could you please stop?" So like, sis, just strike him with the lightning. And she was
like,
the
"This is
whole
my
monologue.
moment."
It would be weather manipulation because I just think like she is the dopest character that has ever come into the whole Marvel universe, and I also think like that's why they refuse to tell her story because they know
it's gonna be litty.
They know like, that is the dopest storyline. Like an African witch who got her powers from the witch doctor, like ended up marrying T'Challa, and it was given very Toni Braxton, he wasn't man enough for me. And she used to, like, in the comic books, used to be reading T'Challa for film, and like he would be like, "Well, I'm a king," and she was like, "What's a king to a goddess?" I will never forget that line that she said. Like, she was like, "What's a king to a goddess?" Like, she just was like, Storm is just like she is just it, and I'm just like, yes, I would love to have.
So I just feel like based on this, we need to get your agent to get them on the phone immediately,
with Marvel,
expeditiously with Marvel, so that you can write Storm. Because speaking of superpowers, imagine if you were born with the ability for the entire world to hear and understand you, and it would translate into any language when you spoke, and that your voice was like a bullhorn. That when you spoke, it translated into every language all around the world. What's the first thing you'd say to the world?
The first thing I would say to the world is, I already know who I am, so I don't need you to tell me who I am.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I say that because people will make you question yourself throughout your life. And I think that was the biggest thing. Like, people ask me all the time, like, what would you tell young George? And I'm always like, you always knew who you were. It was the world that tried to tell you you didn't know who you were. Yeah. And so it's like, just reiterating, like, I know who I am, so I don't need you to tell me who I am. Yeah. And anybody who was at the bar last night knows I had a conversation with a certain somebody who kept trying to sway my opinion on something. I had to keep reminding her, like, I know who my ancestors are, and I know I'm black, and I know where I came from. Like, I hear what you're saying, but you ain't swaying this viewpoint.
Right. Like, you're like, I'm saying.
She was like, we can learn from each other. I said, there's nothing I can learn from you.
You should have just told her you study no business.
There's nothing I can learn from you because I know exactly what I'm talking about this thing when it deals with my people and the people, my people. Like, I don't need you to educate me on that. So that would be what I say to people.
I would love it. Yeah, no, I'm always the most agitated when people try to tell me about things that I'm learning about. I'm like, listen, I could name 1 million things and you could name 1 million more in which I have no idea of what I am talking about whatsoever. But this thing we're talking about, right? This corner right here, back out. Back out of that corner. So what feedback from readers has resonated most with you? And how has it impacted your perspective on writing and its impact? And I think that's a perfect follow-up question to that, because it's just like, as writers, we try to say I feel like writers are always working out something internally, whether we admit it or not. Like, no matter what we're doing, we're working out some kind of internal issue that we have on the page. And the page is just a place of therapy and cleansing, and even if it's not us, right? Like, sometimes you work out your cousin's story for them, or you work out your sister's story for them. So what is it that you have heard from readers that have impacted you that you were like, oh my God? Because I've had young readers tell me stuff about my book that I was like, dang, that's what that meant. Thank you. Like, I just saw this character. Me and Geely thought we had a character. We thought we had redeemed him at the end, and a bunch of young women were like, y'all didn't redeem him. He did that selfishly for himself because he was still trying to do this. I'm like, man, I still need to work out my boy issues. Like, okay, thank you, Queen, for educating me. I know you 12, but you got this. So what are some of the things that you've heard from your readers that have impacted you?
Yeah, I think some of the things that I've heard from my readers were, the biggest thing was like, when I made the decision to use Hope's dead name versus not using Little Kevin's name, who was my cousin that I went through sexual abuse with. Like, not using his real name in All Boys Aren't Blue, like, that was one of the biggest things I was challenged on. And I was able to explain, I was like, well, Nanny was still alive, and like, Hope had already passed, Nanny was still alive when I wrote the book, and I was like, I just didn't want her to have to like have a different view of her grandchild. Like, that was like something I was trying to still protect in a way. Even though it was like I had every right to tell my story, she was still alive, and I was like, I just couldn't imagine her. And she was also going through having a glioblastoma, so she was terminally ill. And I just, to myself, I just can't imagine putting that in there and somebody coming to her and saying something to her before she passes about this grandchild who she has heralded. Because she lost it because he was killed. And them challenging me on that is why in We're Not Broken I put his name and said what happened. Like, I mean, I already said what happened, but I put his name and put his name to it and said why now I'm choosing to say what his name was, because it didn't diminish him in any way. It didn't harm him in any way. It didn't harm Nanny in any way. It was just like me having to really come to terms with myself about like what I was still trying to protect. Because it was like, what am I actually protecting in the changing of the name? What am I actually doing when I do this, right? Because I'm still not healing myself, because I'm still worried about everybody else's pain over mine. And so that challenged me to have to really fully go through it, frankly, and name the thing that it was, and name the person that it was, and fully like get it up off of my chest. And I think the other thing that most people came back with, which I was talking about yesterday, was the name changing chapter. I didn't think that was gonna be like the most pivotal chapter in the book, or one of the bigger chapters, but there are a lot of people who have started to change their names because they read the chapter. Like, A lot of people have transitioned because of that chapter. Like, and I get like messages like, well, I've decided like I actually don't like my name. I told my mother I don't like my name, so I changed it. And I'm just like, and like I'll meet people like yesterday. This young non-binary person came up and was like, I go by now, and because I read the book, and I was like, oh, okay. And their mother was right there, like, yep, they don't like the name I gave them, so I was like, okay. But it was like I have those type of interactions where people will come up and be like, that name change chapter changed my life, so now I changed my name. And my parents hate the fact that I go by a different name, but like I meet so many teenagers who go by chosen names.
Yes.
Now, and are always like, that chapter about the name change is the thing that like did it for them. And it's funny because I still go by George, even though most people in my family call me Matthew. Like nobody in my family calls me George. Like anybody who's been around them, like they only will call me George if they have to fake it because they're around mixed company. Yeah. And they're like, well, we don't want nobody to know we don't call you that. But everybody calls me Matthew. Nobody calls me George. My dad has never called me George. My mother, she only does it because she knows when the cameras cut her on to call me George. But nobody calls me George. A lot of my aunts and cousins don't know that my real name is George. Anytime they hear it, they're like, who the hell is that? Because I don't go by that. I go by Matt, and I go by Matthew, and my nephew calls me Matt. Like, all the kids in the family call me Matt. Nobody uses that name. So it has been a very interesting journey of being known as George M. Johnson to the world, even though my entire family calls me Matthew. And cannot stand the name George. And so that name change chapter was like the most resounding thing that has come back about like owning and having agency in what you want to be called.
Yes. It's funny, I have a girlfriend that I went to high school with who recently changed her name. And she's 40, none of your business years old. And she changed her name. She just decided that the name that she was given was not a name that makes sense to her anymore, and her lived experience anymore, and the journey she's on, and she changed it. And of course, all of her friends and family, we're just like, well, all of her friends and her chosen family are just like, well, we're rocking with you, Victoria to us now. Well, it's no big deal. But her mom insists on posting her dead name on Facebook. In the spirit of fun, if All Boys Aren't Blue were to be adapted into a musical, what genre of music would best represent the essence of your Memoir-Manifesto?
What genre of music? I guess it would have to be R&B, but I guess it's like also
this
like
is very much giving R&B right now.
Right, it's like quantified R&B, right? It's like it's not scissor R&B. So I want to be clear. It's not scissor R&B. It's not Summer Walker R&B. It's more Erykah Badu and the girls. I would say like that 94 to like 2003 range of R&B, like the Mary album, and but it also go just far enough to get you to like Beyonce's Dangerously in Love. Okay. So it's like, it gives you just enough of Mariah Carey's music box at the beginning, but it gets you all the way to Dangerously in Love with the Mary album sitting right there to supplant it.
I love it. I feel like We Are Not Broken is definitely my life.
It is, because that's what I wrote it to.
See? So it gave all the right vibes. I swear I did not know that he wrote it to my life. Yes, but first of all, that's my dear friend Alvin is in the car. We went on a road trip and we listened to the audio of We Are Not Broken in the car. And when I tell you, it had us in the chokehold. I know we're talking about All Boys Aren't Broken. If you guys have not read We Are Not Broken, when I tell you all I aspire to be now is Nanny, that's all I aspire to be now is Nanny. When I was on CBS this morning, I told Gail King, and she was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, I want to be a sage old black lady in a house coat with some sun tea on the front. And so she gave me a moo-moo. It was from Saks, so it was nice. But that's all I aspire to be, because I feel like women, like, I feel like what we think of greatness is so sadly artificial now that we don't recognize how impactful the nannies of the world were. Because like when I think about my grandmother was part of the Great Migration that moved from Mississippi to Chicago. And I remember as a child hearing all the stories about how every family, we had a huge family in Chicago, but they had all come from Mississippi, Tennessee, and how every single one of them stayed, my grandmother's name was Indy, how everybody stayed at Indy's house when they made that transition. Like every single family member brought their entire family, their kids, even their siblings, and they would stay at Indy's house. And Indy was a gangster even back then. She owned a 5 and dime. She also was a bootleg preacher. She also read the bones during the week to make extra money. She was preaching on Sunday. She was flipping the bones during the week. And so, she was financially stable. So she helped you get on your feet. She helped you get the down payment for your first house. She was like an in-house banking system. And it's funny because my baby cousin, long lived young Dolph, he has a foundation for his grandmother, who was my grandmother's first cousin. And so we talked about how these women carried entire families on their backs for generations.
Right.
And it's like, to me, that is the power and beauty in family. And that is when we talk about the strong black woman trope, which we are all drastically over. But like, these are who we're talking about, the nannies and the Indies of the world, and how they had multi-generational effects. My son, who never met my grandmother, who died, she passed away long before my son was born, can talk about Indy as if though he was in the room with her.
Right.
Because of all the stories that he's heard from family members over the years. And so when crafting We Are Not Broken, oh my God, that book is so beautiful, and it hit me so much because I was here, it was like listening to a story about Indy, you know what I mean? And I know that I'm not the only one, you're not the only one, we all had a nanny. So when you think about your own life, how much of your life is nanny?
Yeah, I always say, I'm blessed and fortunate that I grew up with a grandmother who was so radical. And it's like, we didn't look at that as radical, but that's like really what Black excellence is, right? Like, Black excellence is not like that I went and got 2 degrees and that I do all these things. Like, Black excellence really was her making a way out of no way. Her being 16, having her first child, and still not graduating from high school, but still becoming a certified nurse, and still running a business, and like doing all of these things that kept our family afloat. That was really what like Black excellence was. And like, she also was like one of the best storytellers. She wasn't the best storyteller than Aunt Margaret. She would get me for that in my dreams, but that was her sister, was Aunt Margaret. But she was just as good a storyteller as Aunt Margaret. And so, when I think about the fact that I tell stories for a living now, like, that's an amazing thing. But it's like, when I think about, like, she just did that shit on a whim. Yeah. Like, we just would sit there and she just would talk for hours on end about cutting the heads off of chickens and watching them run. And, our great migration was from South Carolina to Jersey. Mm-hmm. And she basically would be like, tell us, like, 'cause we were like, well, how'd y'all get in Jersey? She was like, well, Uncle Mania, they used to call him Knuckles, and he beat this boy up real bad. So
it always had one of those stories in there.
So after he beat the boy up, they called the cops. Before the cops got there, we put his ass on the train and we sent him to Jersey. And then your Auntie Evelyn, I'm like, well, how did she get up there? There was a girl named T99. They used to call her T99 so fine. And she said, put her hand in Margaret's face, and Margaret beat that girl's ass. And we put and Evelyn beat her ass. And then we put Evelyn on the train and we sent her to New Jersey. And then so-and-so did this, and then we sent them to New Jersey. And like, before you knew it, everybody was in New Jersey. And then Nanny ended up in New Jersey, and she was the baby, and then she ended up becoming the matriarch, right? And she ended up becoming the baby because her 3 younger siblings died in a fire when she was 4. And so they were 3, 2, and 1, and they all died in a fire. And she ended up being saved and became the baby of the family, and then became the matriarch. But the tattoo that I have of her is on my fingers. It's 78 markings for every year she was alive. And so I always say now that, like, I have my grandmother's hands. And so every story I write comes from her. And so I put her on my hands because everything I do is like telling her story too. And like, she is helping me to tell all of these stories and put these stories in the world, because that's what she used to do. And then I carry her everywhere with me. Like, this is hers. She had it for over 30 years. This is old jewelry, so like you can't get jewelry like this no more. Because they don't make it this fine. No shade. But this is over 30 years old, but she used to wear it everywhere. When she got sick, she had to go into the MRI or into the machine, and she would take it off. And then one time, I think she knew she was getting close to the end, and one time she just put it on my neck, and I was like, all right, like, I'll give it back when he's done. And she was like, no, you keep it. And I just never took it off since then. And yeah, so she's always with me. But like, I always feel like I get to put her in the world. It's like we quote Martin Luther King, we quote Toni Morrison, we quote all these people, but sometimes we forget that like these ancestors are already in our families, already giving us the words, and we don't all have the opportunity to put their words into the world. And so in Writing Weird Not Broken, I got to put her sayings, her words into the world, so that nobody would ever forget her. But then like it's just a reminder that we shouldn't forget those living, breathing ancestors that sit in our families that give us all those wisdoms either, because it's just so easy to hear those stories and then just forget about them, when those stories are literally what like take us into our future. And so I wrote about her because it was like, I don't want anybody else to forget about those things, and like lean into those things, like, because it's super, super important.
I love it. Well, I could sit here and talk to George all day because George is my favorite person in America. But I want to give you guys an opportunity to ask some questions. So we have a microphone right here if you guys want to come down and ask George some questions. Don't all run at once.
Right.
Come on down, the price is right. You might want a brand new car.
I'm like, the person who I think I've known longest in the room is here, sitting in the back with that fitted on. That's Wayne. That's my line brother.
You like the price is right?
So I am going to call out Wayne because we pledged together at JU University, and we are alphas.
Hello, I'm Sean. Quick question. So first of all, I can't remember which chapter it was in, but you talked about growing up and playing on the playground, and I underlined in the book, I love that you said monkey bars.
Yes.
So I'm from Mississippi, I grew up on a monkey bar. But talking to other people about, what's on the playground, a lot of people say jungle gym.
What?
So I love that you said monkey bars in particular. So what are some like key phrases from your childhood, just your upbringing, that you had to explain to other people because they may not have ever heard about it before?
Okay. So monkey bars, definitely, because you're right. Everybody don't call them monkey bars for some reason. I'm like, I always knew them as monkey bars.
Me too.
Middle school, like, and this is the one thing, I love my editor dearly, but she made me change it to look. My publicist is like, I'm not gonna listen. She made me change it in the book to junior high, but Maxon is literally called Maxon Middle School. And so in Jersey and like up north, they don't call them junior highs, they call them middle school.
Yeah.
Like it's the middle school between high school and elementary school. And so that was something that I wish I fought for a little bit more, because it was like, oh, well, we call them junior highs. I'm like, no, okay, well, I'll just let it rock. But realistically, it is called a middle school, and a lot of people don't know that term. I think every now and then, like, you get into like the soda versus pop conversation. Like, it's like, I'm from Jersey, it's called soda. What else? Chopped cheese sandwiches. Hoagie versus subs. Right. Like, Jersey is called a sub. Like it's a submarine sandwich. You're gonna get a sub. But like if you go to Philly, they're gonna say hoagies. It's like that's just like a very regional thing to that area, but it realistically is a sub. And so like they're oftentimes, and I guess when you from Jersey, like you don't pronounce anything OFS, you pretty much pronounce everything AWF. So like I say coffee, I don't say coffee, like, it's coffee. And I say orange. So like there are a lot of phrases that I'm gonna say. People be like, wait, what? I'll be like, coffee, like it's coffee, like CAWFEE, like that's just how we say it. We say off, like AWF. So I think like that's a lot of like that Jersey slang that comes in sometimes. That people be like, what the hell do you mean? You know. So yeah.
All right,
Good evening. I'm actually curious as to what other titles you did create. You spoke about the one, but what were the other three that you were coming that you had come up with? Remember?
No, that's a good question. I'm trying to remember. Like I sent it in an email, so it was like, I feel like one of them was like, it had something with a tiger in it. Like it wasn't Eye of the Tiger, but it was something with a tiger. I do know something with a tiger with a tiger. Right? I was like, what the hell am I?
Or what was the feeling behind it?
The other titles. The feeling behind the other, that's a good question. The feeling behind the other titles that I was trying to create, it was like I was trying to make it all make sense. Like, 'cause I wasn't sure what the hell their issue was with Smile Black Boy Smile. So I was already pissed. Because this was my first book, and this was like my debut book, and I had never signed a book deal before, so I could say in the moment, I'm like, so do you think people are not gonna buy a book because it got black in the title? That's what I felt like. And so once I then learned publishing though, it was like, okay, I get what you mean. And mind you, like, because we're literally looking at the book cover for my next book right now, it's like I'm looking at the book cover right now and I'm like, now I understand why you have to change things or whatever, because you're also thinking about sales, you're also thinking about universal appeal, you're also thinking about a lot of other things. The person who did the next book cover is right there, that's Charlie Palmer. So I'm gonna end up talking with him in a second, because we decided on this, so I need his opinion. Because they sent me multiple versions. So that was realistically what went into it, was like, what makes this, like what actually can be like these 4 words, these 3 words that go on this cover that will get it. And so like when I was sitting there and I was just coming up with different things, and then like it was like all boys aren't blue. And I was like, right, like I'm sick of gender reveals. This makes sense to me. And this is what the book is kind of about, right? Like, because I could talk about my blackness within it, I could talk about my queerness within it, like it all just worked out in that way. But like some of those other titles were terrible. Like, because I was like, I don't know what they want. Like, I thought I had hit a home run with Smile Black Boy Smile. So, yes. But it's all right. I'm gonna turn something else into that.
You do learn a lot, because yes. I'm Not Down With You Tonight, our original title was Mass Disturbance. And they were like, it sounds sci-fi. And we're like, no, but a riot is called a mass disturbance. And they were like, it sounds sci-fi. We've done 4 focus groups. They think it's a science fiction book. And so we pulled I'm Not Down With You Tonight from the page. One of the characters says that.
See?
To another character. Yeah, but you are super defensive on your debut.
Yes.
You think everything is out to get you. By your 4th book, you halfway don't want to even be involved. You're like, do y'all have a title?
Hello, everyone. I'm a little shy. First, I want to say I'm very proud of you and the progression that you've made from when we first met. So my question is really for you. What would you tell the George that I knew back in college? The one that was in his shell, that was not as open and fluid as you are today. What would you tell yourself or someone like you now?
Yeah, thank you, Wayne, for spilling my tea. Because everybody thought I was a butch queen already, right? God, what would I tell College George? No, that's real, because like I think about College George a lot. I was just saying yesterday how like I didn't write All Boys Aren't Blue. Like 5-year-old me, 10-year-old me, 15-year-old me wrote All Boys Aren't Blue. The past versions of myself wrote this book. I just became the vessel to tell a story. Because they have always wanted to say their truth and say their piece. And so I think the biggest thing I would tell College George would have been like, you did what you had to do as a means of survival and not to feel guilty about it. I think it's easy to feel extreme amounts of guilt about like, why didn't I come out sooner? Why didn't I do this thing sooner? Why didn't I fully live in myself and whatever? But it's like, I did what I had to do to survive. And like, I wanted to be an alpha. So of course I lied I was queer, even though like my wrist was the whole process. Like, you know, wrist was just bent the whole process. But it was like, all right, I'll lie. I'll do whatever I have to do to get the things that I want. And it's like, you could be made to feel guilty about those things, or you start to feel guilty about those things, because that's just what life makes you feel like you lied, you faked, you did this thing. But it was like, no, I did it as a means of survival. And that's something that as queer people, we've just had to do historically. And I didn't have a blueprint. I would have loved to have had a blueprint, but like, you know, I just have to remind the older versions of myself, like, you had to go through what you went through because you had to be somebody else's blueprint in the future. And if you had a blueprint, there would be no All Boys Aren't Blue. And if you had a blueprint, there would be a lot of the things that you achieved wouldn't have happened because your path would have looked different. And so it's okay that your path had to be the road less traveled, because now you have built a road that other people can go down. And so that's always what the reminders to my younger selves have been. It's like, it's okay that you had to go through a lot of trauma, because at the end of the day, you end up with a lot of triumph, and you basically give a lot of people the road that you never had. But if you had that road, maybe we don't sit here on the stage today talking about this book. Maybe this book never exists. So it's okay that you had to go through those things, because now you get to be this person for so many other people.
I think that's a beautiful place, because you made your road by walking it, and so many young people are so grateful to you. So I know just at Caris how many of your books we've sold to young people. You know, we have 4 trans support groups for you kids, and your book is just anecdotally, just hearing them talk has meant so much to them. So thank you for your work. Thank you, Kimberly, for your work, because you also have touched so many young people. We want to invite y'all to come out into the lobby, have the opportunity to have more one-on-one with George as you get your book signed. But put your hands together one more time.